let's talk about the subtle art of not giving a fuck. This is a book by Mark Manson. It is a book I read years ago, and I strongly recommend to you. Mark Manson writes a blog. He writes a blog about uh, life, love, dating, um, you know, um, depression, dealing with depression. He has a blog, wrote this book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which I read years ago. The book, oddly, has been turned into a movie, a documentary film released by Universal Pictures. It's available on video on demand, so you can see it and check it out. So it's not a theatrical release, but I would describe it as like a low budget doc that kind of takes the point of view. It's basically a long form interview with Mark Manson where he tells his life story. He tells stories that are from the book, and then there are visual representations of those stories with, you know, they cast an actor to play Mark Manson when he was a young kid and through various stages of life. And he tells these incredible stories. And the way that they tell the story, they make it really interesting. It could just be a guy sitting being interviewed for 90 minutes. That's not the way they go about it. They actually go about it by he's telling you a story, then they show the story being told. So the documentary is done in a really visually fun and interesting way to tell the story. And before we get into it, I just got to say, I cannot strongly enough recommend not just the book, but this movie. It's one that deals with um, questions of purpose. Why are we here? How do we find happiness in life? How do we deal with depression? How do we deal with the things that people get so upset about when you read people on social media getting so mad and you see the levels of frustration have just been cranked up in the world? Why are people so angry? And it really, and the whole premise of not just the documentary, but the book is there are a lot of things that we get upset about that are not really that important. And the book is basically a long form essay to remind you to focus on the things that truly matter in life. It starts out with his own personal life story. When he was 13 years old, Mark Manson was caught with drugs as a kid. When he was in junior high, he was pulled away from his family and friends because he had drugs in his bag. He then decided to go on this, as he grew older, decided to go on this sort of life sabbatical where he worked for a job, but it was a job he didn't care about. And, like it talks about like also how people deal with the daily grind, like, our daily grind. You hear people like, if I just get this one thing, I'll be happy. If I get 2 weeks vacation, I'll be happy. If I get a raise, I'll be happy. If I get this, I'll be happy. And once you set those benchmarks, you will never be happy once you get that thing. So it's about learning to live in a constant state of want in a good way, that you're striving for more, but happy in the place that you are. I know it's like, it's going to be a lot of lessons that you're going to hear where you're like, well, I've heard that before, but there's a great story he tells about Megadeth and Metallica and how Metallica kicked out the lead, one of the guitarists that ended up going on to create Megadeth. I don't know metal music all that well. And there was this constant rivalry between the two. Is it Dave Mustaine? Yeah. Who created Megadeth. He's like, I'm going to make a band that's going to be even bigger than Metallica. It never became bigger. But that journey, like, it's like the lesson from that is really interesting. He also tells a story about how he had this friend in music school who died in an accident tragically, and how he dealt with that death. It's riveting. And there's a really interesting story. So he tells these stories that are about him. He also tells stories about other people as an example. And he talks about how we create our own worldview. And you have a choice. And you may not be responsible for everything that happens in your life, but you're accountable for how you react to it. So, and this even in my own life, I have experienced this. I remember when I was a young dad, and I would get upset, when my kids did certain things. They say, don't cry over spilled milk. And I made a conscious decision. I'm like, I'm not going to get that upset anymore, because you know what? It's not worth it. Don't cry over spilled milk is a phrase for a reason. It's It's like, all right, we're gonna laugh. We're just gonna laugh with this happen. What do? We get a rag, we clean it up, we spill things, it happens. Right. And this movie is sort of a big picture view of dealing with all of that, and in particular depression. But he brings it, and this is like it's not as true in the book, but in the documentary, he talks about our sort of modern day social media hysteria that has turned people into anger machines. And how do we deal with that? It's a riveting documentary. It's you can rent it or buy it, whatever. But like if you're in a place where you're kind of, I think we could all use a tune-up. I personally love self-development books. I've read them, since I was a kid. I feel like it's one of those things of like, we could all use a sort of tune up for our brains, like how we can be better at things, whether it be, better in life, better to our friends, better to ourselves, better at dealing with what's happening in the world. And I think in particular now with social media being like such a dark place, this movie is like a welcome uh, has such a welcome message. There's another story he tells about this Japanese soldier at the end of World War II who the emperor gave like specific instructions to never stop fighting. And this guy was in the woods for like decades, just hid in the woods, still fighting the war after World War II had ended. And people went looking for him. And he told his life story, and his worldview was one way, that he was given a mission and a purpose and stuck with that even after the war ended. And then what happened to this person? It's a really fantastic part of the documentary. So I cannot recommend this movie enough. If you have not read Mark Manson's book, get it, or at least look up Mark Manson's blog. Really inspirational essays about, dealing with breakup, dealing with depression, dealing with failure in business, even dealing with success in business. How do you deal with that? Fantastic film. And the subtle art of not giving a fuck. It's a thing that before I read the book, I felt like, oh, I'm already doing a lot of the things that are in this book, because I've been, like there's like this weird attack video that surfaced about me on YouTube like a week or so ago. And I was like, oh, that's
Don't
really,
look it up, by the way.
huh?
Don't look it up. Don't give them the views.
I'm not giving them the views. I don't giving them the time of day. I don't care. But what I'm saying is that I have been attacked the entire time I've been doing Film Threat. And even when I was doing Film Threat in Michigan as a small little zine, there was almost like a thing of like, oh, you're doing this thing, it's never going to amount to anything. There are a lot of like, and I cut a lot of those negative people out of my life who like would bring me down or be passive aggressive or make a derisive comment about any sort of minor success I may have had. And I would be like, hey, did you look at this? We got written up in this outlet, this media outlet wrote about Film Threat. Whatever. Nobody reads that. Like this has happened to me forever. And it's really about not listening to the trolls and not listening to the haters. And I feel like we all could do with a little bit of this message in our lives. So whether you get the audiobook, whether you buy the book, whether you see this documentary, if you're at a place where, and I feel like we all can use it, like, and I also read a lot of like wonky like business books, like the 4 Hour Work Week, which I can never get down to 4 hours. I mean, that's ridiculous. But I like to read a lot of those books that will just give you most of these books you read, and there's like it's like 4 or 5 hours to read one of these books, but like there's like a kernel of one thing, one takeaway, one really good takeaway from that book. And this book has a lot of them, this book and movie. So strongly recommend it. Alan, do you have any thoughts? I mean, you didn't see it.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it, nor have I read the book, but this has been kind of a principle I've lived by for a long time. You tweeted 4 words: make Marvel male again. And just the idea that Mary Sue would come out and write a very long article about these 4 little words.
Yeah.
That Inside the Magic would do the exact same thing. And I'm like, it probably took you, a second to type it out.
Yeah.
But how many hours did they spend mulling over those words, trying to formulate their thoughts and feelings, and then finally get it out on their sites. I mean, that's the ultimate example of this. It's taking something just so small and letting it obsess your life like that. I mean, I used to be that way. I used to be a stress ball in college, or just after college. Like my whole family they have full heads of hair, and it was during that time where I was stressed out in my 20s that I lost a significant amount of hair, and that's been kind of my gauge now of how stressed out am I at this moment of the state of my hair. Like if you see me get the Reed Richards right here on the side, the white hair on the side, then you know that I'm under an incredible amount of stress, and it's those little things where you just have to say, well, why am I stressed? How big is this thing? I have to tell even my daughter this. It's you got to stress out about the big things and not about the little things.
And even that, the book and the documentary talk about how, by example, how other people dealt with it, how Mark dealt with it in his own life, and how he's very he admits he was an asshole during many periods of his life.
Oh yeah.
And certainly I would admit that. There are times where I've been an asshole, and sometimes, like, I used to call it, when I was raising my kids, I would call it dad mode. It's when I had to go into dad mode, but never out of anger, just out of like, in one case, I was trying to protect one of my kids who like just ran across the street without looking. I was terrified. And so I needed to imprint a memory so they would never do that again. So, but it also talks about how stress can be a good motivator.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people can do their best work, under stress. It can be a good thing if utilized correctly.
Yeah. I mean, stress exists for a reason. You need to have stress.
Well,
There's comments about my hair. I'll say this about my hair. This hair has been like this since my 20s. I haven't lost, I haven't grown it back. But I did lose a big chunk of it in my 20s because of all that stress. And so every day I wake up and I comb through this thing. It's just a reminder of you've got to manage your stress today. And I think that's it's one of these life lessons that I've carried through for at least the last 30 years.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, like, I work good. I work well under pressure. I love it. Pressure is a good thing. My favorite thing in the world is a deadline. Give me a deadline. Might not exactly make it, but give me a deadline. A project needs to be done. Boom. Good. What are the action items to get that done? But I feel like this movie, a lot of people would benefit by seeing this movie right now because of the state of our world. And he gets into that. There's a whole montage in the movie where, and it is Mark Manson, by the way, Mark Manson, Mark Manson. Could you look up his blog? Actually, look up his blog. Yeah, I know it seems weird because it does sound close to Mark Maron. It's not Mark. Mark Maron is the comedian who is, he's, yeah. We got to find his, yeah.
Here, let me grab it here.
So the full title of the book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a counterintuitive approach to living a good life.
Yeah. And the most uninspiring website here.
It's just, can you share it? It's just like a cheap blog. I know. And yeah. It's just like Mark Manson. Here he is. That's it. It's like, these are his blog posts. Happiness. It's motivation. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very,
I just find it interesting that, this is how social media is run. This is how your feeds are run. People want conflict. And that's what they push to the front. That's what they're presenting you every day is conflict, just to increase your stress levels, to either make you mad or go crazy.
Yeah, and there is a whole montage in the movie of showing like out of like social, like viral videos that went viral of people like in anger moments. And Mark talks about like what led them to that moment. How did they get there?
Mhm.
what's going on in
What
their.
rabbit hole did you go down?
Yeah, exactly. But it's fascinating because he takes a step back. It's really like, look, if you're looking for some motivation or to get out of maybe what may be a low level depression, and I know that, like, you know, we're you know, this pandemic stuff, I still see people wearing a lot of people wearing masks.
Mhm.
When I went to the Burbank AMC 16 or went to go to screenings, it's weird. It's like a head. And look, I don't mask shame if people need to wear it. They may, in fact, be sick, right? They may actually be sick. I think that, like, before the pandemic, what would we do when we were sick? We would just stay home and get better.
Yeah.
So maybe just keep doing that, since that seemed to always work.